Danielle, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Nash.
So before we get into the agreement itself and what's been agreed to, can you give our viewers a little bit of background? Like, what is the Rio Grande Compact?
Absolutely. It's a 1939 agreement between three states, New Mexico, Texas, and Colorado, which share the Rio Grande's waters between them. And it was ratified by Congress, which is how all interstate waters are governed in the United States. This agreement has requirements for water to pass across state lines and at one point into Elephant Butte in order to make sure that each state is getting its appropriate amount of water.
Okay. And what were the issues that were taken with how the states were sharing this water?
Oh man, if there's water, it's being fought over, and that is so true on the Rio Grande. There were a series of lawsuits all over the place between irrigation districts and counties, state governments and counties, the state governments against each other in these overlapping disputes over water on the Rio Grande for a long time. These really kicked up in the 1990s in a drought period after we had some good rains in the 90s, but then there was a drought period in the early 2000s, and that really kicked up the intensity of water litigation.
Once there wasn't enough to go around, then people started fighting.
That's right. Scarcity breeds litigation when it comes to water. But what happened here is that there was an agreement that two irrigation districts, one in Texas, one in southern New Mexico, and the federal government came to. And New Mexico's Attorney General at the time, Gary King, in 2011, said that New Mexico was being shorted its water and sued the federal government in federal court. And Texas then escalated that in 2013 and took it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over these interstate water disagreements because it's the only court in America that can decide problems between the states.
Okay, so New Mexico was suing the federal government, Texas sued New Mexico, but these alliances, kind of who was against who, didn't stay stagnant throughout this 13-year period. So how did that shift around over time?
It was a serious do-si-do, really. Texas accused New Mexico of groundwater pumping and using water for irrigation in southern New Mexico to the detriment of Texas, saying that we owed them tens of thousands of acre feet. We're talking billions of dollars potentially in damages, and the requirement that New Mexico provides that water. It's an important part of water litigation. The federal government joined the lawsuit in 2019. The Supreme Court allowed them to join as a party.
Even though they're not part of the compact.
That's right. It's completely unusual. It's never happened in water law before. But because the federal government operates important infrastructure there, Elephant Butte Dam, the very first reclamation dam, the series of canals, they deliver water to the irrigation districts in Mexico. The Supreme Court agreed that they have a unique interest. So it was Texas and the federal government arguing that New Mexico's pumping and groundwater use was harming their interests on the Rio Grande.
Okay. Well, a settlement has now been reached. The Supreme Court has accepted that agreement. What did the justices have to say?
Yeah, this is the second time that this has happened. The first time everyone came to the bargaining table, the federal government felt left out. They felt that the agreement that Texas and New Mexico had worked out to fix the issues of making the water measurable at the border, for example, sharing water agreements, agreeing to more drought conditions, those were unacceptable to the federal government and the two irrigation districts down there.
And so that was back in, 2024, the Supreme Court declined to accept this agreement.
That's right.
Now they've accepted it.
A new agreement, that's right.
And why did they like this one?
Well, first and foremost, the federal government likes the agreement. They came to the table and all parties have agreed that this agreement fixes the problems of the usage of water in southern New Mexico and West Texas.
Okay, well, let's get into how it fixes that. So the settlement sets out new rules for how New Mexico and Texas will share water. Let's start with irrigation water. How will the states split that up?
That's right. So New Mexico and Texas are going to now have they have agreed to a 57-43% split. This is a little weedy, but it's because New Mexicans and Texans paid for the building of Elephant Butte Dam way back in 1906, And that's the percentage of New Mexican farmers, 57. They paid for 57% of the dam and 43% in Texas. So that's why the water is being split that way.
So New Mexico gets the lion's share, it gets the majority.
That's right.
Okay. And how was it being shared before?
It was also in this informal 57-43 split, but the problem was a lot of this is about handshakes and old handshakes and people disputing over who shook whose hand. So now it's official, it's written in the doctrine that this is how the water is going to be shared. And also there are agreements for drought sharing. If say New Mexico shorts Texas on the amount of water we're supposed to send at the state line, then we can ask to borrow it from, we can ask these irrigation districts to ship it on using their canals across the state line.
All right, and now what about groundwater? You mentioned that was a huge sticking point in this lawsuit over the years. What has New Mexico agreed to change about how it pumps groundwater?
Yeah, so the hard part is that groundwater and irrigation water are so connected in this region of the river. When your water is flowing downhill, even above stream and underground, and so when we're pumping, the arguments that Texas, of course, are making and the federal government is that when New Mexico was pumping groundwater, it was then taking water that was filling up in the river that would then fill up our depleted aquifers. Okay. So these interconnected relationships between groundwater and irrigation water are kind of complex and also kind of simple. If you're taking water, right, like people think you might be taking the water that's owed to them. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so all this to say is that New Mexico does have an agreement to reduce the amount of water being used in the lower Rio Grande. That's by a number, it's 18,200 acre feet by the next decade. That's a lot of water.
So what would that mean locally? How would that impact show up?
Okay, this is something that the state has been working on for a while. So after talking to the Interstate Stream Commission Director, Hannah Riesling White, she mentioned that the state has worked on programs to fallow irrigation land, to buy out irrigation rights, and we're also trying to track how much water is being pumped for either irrigation, farming, or for smaller municipal uses, right?
So is it not known how much is being pumped?
There are good estimates, okay. But the state wants to measure this almost to the drop, right? We're wanting more accuracy. With every drop counting on the compact, the state wants to know where every drop is going.
And where was every drop going? Like in terms of what it was pumping, the state, if it has to reduce this by what, 18,000 acre feet, who's gonna feel the brunt of that?
It's likely gonna be agriculture. Agriculture is the biggest user of water on the Rio Grande, generally speaking, even though it's an important source of water for places like Albuquerque and El Paso. They get their drinking water from there. Not nearly as much pull as agriculture does.
Okay. And you mentioned when you explained what the Rio Grande Compact is, that it's not just Texas and New Mexico. Colorado has also been part of this compact. How do they plug into this agreement, if at all?
They were present during the litigation. They were mentioned in the lawsuit, which made it a little confusing, I think, for folks watching from the outside. But the real dispute here was in southern New Mexico and Texas. So Colorado is just one of the folks just trying to make sure that this river is split equitably because their farmers care about it too.
Okay. Any other key agreements or new rules that New Mexicans should be aware of?
Yeah, there was this sort of no man's land of southern New Mexico before under the compact because everything put into Elephant Butte, which is 100 miles from the state line, was considered compact Texas. So southern New Mexico in some ways.
So once you got below Elephant Butte, you were in Texas.
You were in Texas according to the compact, not according to any maps.
Yeah.
But now there is this agreement and acknowledgement of southern New Mexico through ensuring that 57-43% split, and also checking that what water is being delivered into Elephant Butte is going to be checked again at the El Paso at the El Paso gauge, which is right at the Texas-New Mexico state line.
Okay, so lining it up more with what the maps show.
What the maps show, and also how it's done. We we do that between New Mexico and Colorado.
Okay. Well, in statements, both Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham and Attorney General Raul Torres said that reaching the settlement will save New Mexicans tons of money. In the governor's words, billions of dollars. For folks who maybe don't understand why this would save money, like what was the financial risk, the liability risk at play?
It's really hard to put a number on that. At the very beginning, again, there was this concern of tens of thousands of acre feet, and there was this understanding that because of the way water law is done, the Supreme Court could agree to make New Mexico pay damages if they found New Mexico was at fault for taking Texas water. So we wouldn't just have to pay back wet water, we would have to pay damages. And that was an estimate of, at one point in time in early 2013, over $1 billion. We've spent, between New Mexico and Texas, we've spent tens of millions of dollars in litigation.
Yeah, I was going to ask that because, yes, it's a settlement is saving potential damage costs, but a lot has been spent over the years on this case, a 13-year case, including on outside legal counsel. Can you break down what the bill has been for this?
I need some more recent data, but we did track that there was at one point tens of millions of dollars being spent on outside counsel in New Mexico, and that Texas was spending way more, right? Like sometimes many times more than New Mexico on this case in terms of their outside counsel. And there was a concern that because Texas has bigger coffers, could they outspend New Mexico on these kinds of things? There's a couple of really important reasons why a settlement was so important, not just to the attorneys, but to all of the parties watching this case. Because water, especially the Rio Grande, has been fought over for a long time, this section of the Rio Grande in particular. And so they said that the best chance of staying out of court is by making a settlement. And so even though the costs of attorneys are a lot, there is another concern that the costs of losing a case like this would be even higher for New Mexico.
So New Mexico really had to dig in if they were the David to Texas's Goliath throughout this.
That's definitely how it seemed. And there were some real concerns from people who've watched this case over its more than decade-long tenure through the court, that they were really concerned for what New Mexico would be on the hook for, wet water-wise and money-wise.
All right. Well, the settlement has been accepted. It's in place. Yeah. What concerns, if any, remain?
The next question is, what do you do when you need to stop pumping? Who has to stop pumping? Those questions remain. All of Las Cruces is on groundwater, and even though there are older rights to agriculture, I think that those policy discussions are going to be a big element.
And do those happen at the municipal level? Are we talking the city council or the mayor of Las Cruces that would weigh into something like that?
The city of Las Cruces actually hired counsel to represent them in this case. NMSU also has its own groundwater rights in the area, right, for its own agriculture studies, but also the campus itself. This is impacting entire regional crops, like pecan growers had their own counsel in this case, and irrigators on chili and onion farms. So there's a real question for what comes next in the lower Rio Grande. There's not as much water.
Okay, and then what about enforcement of these agreements? If the state has agreed to this, and obviously you're saying there's going to be some push and pull on the local level of who has to stop pumping and who this is going to hit the hardest, but who oversees that people are actually following through with what they've agreed to?
That's going to be the Office of the State Engineer and the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission. These two water bodies are going to be really important and critical in implementing this stuff. They've received $22 million from the last legislative session to implement agreements on buying out land and putting in more monitoring in the lower Rio Grande. They have $40 million from the federal government that they got through the Inflation Reduction Act, my apologies, to implement the settlement, to pay farmers or buy water rights or do this kind of work. It's going to be expensive, and the state says that they're willing to do the work on it.
All right, Danielle Prokop, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nash.